Welcome back to Spellbound. It's me, BEEJ, and I read some great books in January, but these are not those. Do Your Worst by Rosie Danan. This was published in 2023 by Berkeley, which is an imprint of one of them. So here's the thing. I love Rosie Danan's previous two contemporary romance novels. I think that she is fantastically sex positive. And she also strikes a really good balance between sort of off-the-wall romance novel premises and emotional depth. So to me, she's kind of like a happy medium between Tessa Bailey and Emily Henry. Except I think that Rosie Danan can write sexual tension extremely well, like exceptionally well. So I went into this book, not gonna lie, with very high expectations. So what happened was very, very disappointing. So this book is about a curse breaker who's hired to break a curse on a castle in Scotland while it's being renovated. And also working on site during the renovations is a recently disgraced archaeologist who's looking to use this as an opportunity to get back into good standing with the archaeology community. So already this has kind of like a fun off-the-wall premise, right? But for a cursed castle, not much cursing happened. And that was weird because in this story, this castle's curse is like super well known in the village, right? For being extremely dark and dangerous, and like terrible shit keeps befalling people who go there. And it involves this feud between two families that had gone on like hundreds of years ago. And it's like very intense and well known as like local lore. Except nothing happened to our main characters and no cursing happened in the book. Like there wasn't nothing. There were two things kind of bad lucky that happened. One involved falling off of a short ladder and into his arms, and the other they just like find a knife. Like, where was the curse? And the awesome sexual tension that we've gotten to know from Rosie Danan is like weirdly absent from this book as well. Like these characters, their chemistry is mid at best, and they don't have good banter. I don't even think they have any banter. They just have like a very weird relationship. Like the forced proximity doesn't do these characters any favors. And finally, this whole plot, which is like a fun off-the-wall premise, right? And it's gonna lead to an even more off-the-wall turning point / climax. Like contemporary romances do this, right? Like fine. But because the characters had zero sexual tension and zero chemistry, it required so much more effort on the reader's part to really invest in that suspension of disbelief to make the plot justifiable. Because what happens, spoiler, is they have to fuck on a dirty mattress next to a bathtub in the middle of a freezing cold castle in order to break the curse. And like, yes, that's wild. But the premise is wild too. So like I could probably get there and be like, I've read less believable and been like, fine, but only if I care about the characters. And these guys were like mid at best. And so it was like, whatever, man, fuck or don't. Like break the curse or don't. Like either, it doesn't seem to make a bit of difference either way. Like the curse itself doesn't seem to be really that big of a deal. So like, who cares? Not me. 3 stars. Tryst Six Venom by Penelope Douglas, self-published in 2022. Penelope Douglas. Big indie name, if we're being honest, right? But what was this book? It was supposed to be a sapphic bully romance. All right. So this book is about Clay and Olivia, and they both attend like a really fancy prep school. But Clay is from old money, so like high expectations, etc., etc. And Olivia is from the wrong side of the tracks, or whatever stupid cliche you want to throw in there. It's probably on the page as well. So naturally Clay bullies Olivia for like being poor or something generic, and but they're on the same field hockey team, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me. That's not how teammates work. This book did not make a lot of sense to me. Maybe it would if I'd stuck around, but I did DNF it at 60%, so we'll never know. So this book was constantly winding and then unwinding sexual tension. I did not build sexual tension over time, and that made the reading experience super weird. So like I can see like the elements are there for a sort of, for the tension itself, right? So you've got Clay, the super uptight walking representation of her parents' expectations, just sort of lashing out at the nearest person, Olivia, just to sort of self-soothe her own wounds. Okay, we get it. And then you've got Olivia, who just kind of silently takes it for no reason that we can understand until she decides finally to plot her revenge, but it takes until 30% of the way through the book to get there. which does not make any sense. And I can see how you are setting up the tension itself to be a sort of, I hate them, why am I attracted to them kind of tension, but that's not what the book does. It waffles between them hating each other and then them literally loving each other like 2 pages later, which is not the case on the page. Because it doesn't make sense between what they're saying and what their characters are actually doing, and how that consistently oscillates back and forth. They're constantly like, oh, I'm done with that bitch, and then the next one they're like back together, and then it's like, I'm done with that bitch. And so it's like, okay, am I watching the building of a toxic relationship? Because that would make more sense, and I hear Colleen Hoover does it all the time, but that's also not what's happening. It's like they'll get together, like the tension's really high, the whatever, and then they'll get together and it's like breaking that tension in a really like carnal and Pornhub kind of way, and then like 2 minutes later they're like pillow talking about how they've always loved each other, but they have to keep this a secret, etc., etc. But then like literally 2 paragraphs later, Olivia's like, that bitch, and Clay is like drawing all over Olivia's like body with a Sharpie of all the places that she should lose weight, like just to humiliate her. And the inner monologue for Clay while doing this is like how much she hates herself, and the monologue for Olivia is how much she hates Clay. So it's not even like in their own minds they're like warring with that tension of, man, I hate this bitch, why am I so attracted? It's not. It's like literally between, I in fact love this person and I also hate this person, but not in a way that even makes sense in a toxic relationship. It's literally just winding a yo-yo and unwinding it just over and over again. It's so annoying. But like, bad storytelling aside, I think what sealed this book as a DNF for me was the incredible internalized misogyny that was present on every page. It was exhausting. So Clay not only had like raging internalized homophobia that she had to deal with, but the internalized misogyny was present, not just present, overflowing from both female main characters as well as every single male supporting character, everyone. It was just so gross and tiring to read about, and to read the sapphic romance with such an overflowing sense of internalized misogyny, like, and the amount of page time dedicated to chastity and virginity, and like seriously, virginity was so present on these pages that it was like a character itself. And it was like, Clay, is your virginity in the room with us right now? Like, you know, it's made up. This whole book feels like the author, P. Doug herself, was just chilling somewhere with like her chin on her hand, like, I wonder what it's like when a girl loses her virginity to another girl. If in a hetero relationship, what they do would technically only be considered foreplay. Is it even really losing it? And then proceeded to write an entire book about that without asking or consulting a single person in the LGBTQ plus community. Also, the book was bad, and I think I said that. Inner Engineering, A Yogi's Guide to Joy by Sadhguru, published in 2019 by Harmony and imprint of Random House. So this book is about a yogi guru from India. He's a bunch of years old, and he talks about how to practice real yoga. That's not me making fun of it. That's me actually acknowledging that what we in the West know as yoga is a very bastardized, whitewashed exercise version of what is in fact a lifelong practice in other cultures. So this book, I can confidently say, intended to explain how to incorporate yoga into your everyday life, or how to incorporate yoga into everything. Honestly, this book wasn't all bad, and though my review of it is not favorable, it's also not my intention to discredit this author or insinuate that they aren't enlightened. Okay, but first of all, this book is supposed to be about using yoga to find joy. And I picked this book up in the throes of depression at the tail end of last year. So I was like really, really ready to learn about a different side of spirituality from an Own Voices author, and not like another white author telling me about white feminism or white spirituality. Okay, so already I was invested. It was definitely a situation where you're going into the class starting with a 100 instead of starting with a 0, needing to build up, you know? Like, I'm here. I'm ready. But for a book on joy, the word joy was only in the book like 3 times. Okay, this book wasn't about joy. And honestly, I'm not even sure what the book was about. I know what the book wanted to be about, or I thought I did for a while, because to be honest, this book definitely meandered. And fuck, maybe that does lend it some credibility, because it is true that this type of spirituality is a little more in line with Taoism than it is with Western logical thought. So Okay, I'm along for the ride. What is the key to enlightenment? Pudding. Sure, let's wander. But during the wandering, we'd learn a few yoga definitions, learn about the author's personal journey to enlightenment, and then it kind of just thrown in some nuggets of either wisdom or madness, and maybe there's no difference. And I enjoyed that. But it wasn't a book about joy or cultivating joy, or that by following these principles, joy should come naturally because. It wasn't. It was a book on yoga. And in following yoga, you should just naturally have joy, because actually you should care about so little. And also, one time while I was riding my bike, I sliced my leg open to the ligament and went to the emergency room, and they were like, you have to be stitched up in the hospital. And I was like, no way, doc, stitch me up right here. I don't have time for that. And he was like, aren't you in pain? I can see your muscle. And he was like, actually, I choose not to feel pain. I can believe and accept that this author is enlightened. I can believe and accept that this author can choose not to feel pain because he is enlightened. I can believe and accept that he exists in a perpetual state of bliss that is at one with the very core of the universe. And I can even believe and accept in his quest to help others achieve that enlightenment. But here's what I can't accept. Other people not achieving enlightenment or reaching enlightenment. In this case, in this spiritual practice, it's like literal Buddhist enlightenment. But like in Christianity, it could be salvation, right? Other people not sort of reaching salvation, enlightenment, whatever, is not an option when their other base needs aren't met. Even in the author's own story, he achieved enlightenment in childhood when he skipped school to contemplate nature while sitting in a tree for like 9 hours. And it made me, I'm not making fun of his story, but I am pointing out some specific details here, because even that in itself is a luxury. This author lived in a time where he had access to go to school. In doing so, he could also choose to skip school with 0 consequences. He had a full belly and a place to sleep at night, and had 0 responsibilities to return home from school to do. He had no responsibility to feed or provide for a family. He had the option and the luxury of skipping a school that he was free to attend in order to sit in a tree for 9 hours and have 0 consequences. And the reality is, very few people in this world today have that as an option. So the idea that everyone in the world is just choosing not to be enlightenment because we don't want to give up our comfort in order to achieve enlightenment is just, it's just a really boomer way of thinking about it. And this guy's a boomer. And let's be clear, I'm not even talking about me or white people or the West. I'm leaving myself entirely out of this conversation, because of course I would have the privilege and the means to be able to sit in a tree for 9 hours and contemplate nature. I guess everything just becomes like really crystal clear in times of actual genocide, but can you imagine telling any of this wisdom in this book to like someone in the Middle East, or let's say Palestine? You know, like telling someone in Palestine currently during what's happening, like, you know, if you could just choose not to feel pain, you'd have a lot more joy. You know, if you would actually not focus on your lack or your want right now, and just take time to just be, you would find yourself more at one with the world. Like, people do not choose to be oppressed. And to go one step further, faith without works is dead, my man. So wouldn't it make more sense and it'd be a better use of time for you, an enlightened fellow who boasts about being able to go days and days without food because he can get nourishment from the sun, would actually spend that time going around to meet those base needs of people instead of proselytizing enlightenment? And like, wouldn't that be able to help more people become more enlightened? Like, it's all connected. Everything's connected. And it's no secret that the order and alignment of the chakras is the same as Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like, you can't teach a hungry child. Universal truths. So that's why I found a top-down approach to yoga from a yogi a pretty weird strategy. But what do I know? Honestly, what do I know? I do know that I was disappointed by this book, and I'm allowed that. So thanks so much for sticking around. Have you read anything very disappointing lately, and what is it? So that I'll know to avoid it. And if you made it to the end of the video, leave a castle emoji in honor of Scotland and also my current obsession, The Traitors. I love that show. And of course, if you liked this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you loved it, hit subscribe. And as always, happy reading.